Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Prepwell Podcast. This week's episode is going to be a bit less intense than last week's. Last week, I proposed the top 10 toughest question that your child needs to answer during the college admissions process, and that was admittedly pretty heavy. I probably, in retrospect, should have broken that down into several different episodes because there was just a lot of meat in there. So this week, we're going to step back and we're going to really shrink it down and work on something a lot more manageable. I want to give a quick overview of how students and parents should think about extracurricular activities, or as we like to call them, ECAs. By now, you probably know that ECAs have become increasingly important in the admissions process. Why? Well, GPA seems to be clustering around a 4-point something for a majority of students. SAT and ACT tests continue to be optional. And even the requirement for letters of recommendation is starting to lose steam. And I'm not going to get into the details about why this is happening or whether it's or not it's a good idea. That would take a long time and get a lot of people very angry. So let's just focus on one thing at a time. Today it will be ECAs. ECAs are things that students do outside of the classroom. It could be almost anything: a job, caring for an elderly parent, sports, robotics club, speech and debate, piano lessons, community service and volunteering, independent study projects, internships, shadowing sessions. Now, I'm sure from that list alone, your head is probably spinning with all these different options. And where should I begin? And so let's pause and discuss how to start getting a handle on this. I'd like to start off with how I want you to think about ECAs. And I'd like you to think about them in 3 distinct buckets. Bucket number 1 is in-school ECAs. Bucket number 2 is summer ECAs. And bucket number 3 is ongoing ECAs. And before we dig into each of those in more detail, let me do a quick review of how colleges actually assess ECAs. And I go into much greater detail on these in prior episodes, so if you're craving more about this particular topic, please check out some of our prior episodes on ECAs in particular and theme building. An admissions officer will often assess the value, quote unquote, of an ECA across 5 different dimensions and grade you on each one. Some schools want their admissions officers to give explicit numbers for each of these dimensions, let's say a grade between 1 and 5, and some schools let admissions officers do this type of calculus on the fly. My advice to you is to think about your ECAs and how they might stand up to the following type of scrutiny. Dimension number 1. Duration. How long have you done the activity? Did you start in the middle of 11th grade when you woke up panicked, realizing that you didn't have any ECAs and you better get started? Or have you been doing the activity for 6, 7, 8 years and it's become a big part of your identity? Dimension number 2, your level of accomplishment in that activity. Did you demonstrate any excellence in the activity? Were you an All-American athlete or prosecutor of the year in mock trial? Do you sing on Broadway? Dimension number 3, leadership. What level of leadership do you bring to the activity? None? Are you the vice president? Are you a treasurer? Are you the president? Dimension number 4, impact. How much did the activity impact or affect others? Did you start a fundraiser in your school which raised $1,500? Or did you then help to scale that program to 25 schools across your state, which then raised $100,000? And finally, dimension number 5, alignment. Is this activity aligned with what you claim to want to do with your life or career or with your intended major? Now, let me give you an example of an ECA that would score high points across the board in all 5 dimensions. Let's just say for context, you were interested in the military. Maybe you wanted to do ROTC at a college and eventually become a military officer. Doesn't matter which branch it is. If one of your ECAs was Eagle Scout in Boy Scouts, for example, you would get a lot of credit for that ECA. In fact, I would guess that you'd probably rank this ECA as your number one activity or close to number one on your priority list of ECAs. Let's discuss why. Dimension number one, duration. Yes, you would get high marks here. Usually to become an Eagle Scout, you will have spent a good 4, 5, 6 years in scouting, often more than that. So the admissions officer knows that this is not just some whim of yours that you've done for 6 months. Dimension number two, level of accomplishment. Yes, high marks. Being an Eagle Scout, the student has reached the highest level of achievement for that particular organization. You can't really go any higher up the ladder than an Eagle Scout, so max points. Dimension number three, leadership. Again, high marks. It is well known that to become an Eagle Scout, a student must go through many, many different leadership positions on his way up the ranks. So there's certainly a demonstration of leadership here. Dimension number four, impact. Well, given that Boy Scouts is a service organization with a mission that demands a lot of community service and volunteer work, the student would certainly get some credit for having an impact on someone other than himself, and they often have hundreds and hundreds of service hours on their way to become an Eagle Scout. And oftentimes Eagle Scouts take on Eagle Scout projects whose impact extends far beyond the scout or the troop and extends far into the community or even well beyond the community or where they live. And lastly, dimension number five, alignment. Once again, high marks for being an Eagle Scout. As a student who wants to become a military officer, being a Boy Scout, and of course an Eagle Scout, proves to the admissions officer that they've done a lot of things that are very relevant for somebody interested in the military. Hiking, backpacking, first aid, survival skills, knot tying, firearms handling, archery, mountaineering, land navigation, and the list goes on and on. So an admissions officer will feel very satisfied in the quality of this ECA for this particular student, and thus would give them high marks. Now, not every ECA will be able to check off so many boxes. It would be great if they did, but don't panic if your ECAs don't quite fit as well into the grading rubric as this one does. However, the goal is to seek out ECAs that would hold up well to this type of evaluation. For those of you who are prep-wellers, now maybe you understand why I spend so much time in your weekly video lessons teaching you about ECAs and trying to help you come up with ideas that will play well with admissions officers. I spend a lot of my time on this topic with my private prep-wellers, as well as in one-on-one sessions with online prep-wellers. How can you build a set of ECAs that will tell a compelling story about what you care about and where you're headed? This is the question. Okay, that was supposed to be a brief overview of ECAs, so I'm just going to stop right there. What I really want to convey today is more of a macro level understanding and awareness and appreciation of how to think about ECAs. I don't really want to get into the weeds today. I'll try my best. There'll be time for that later on. So from a macro perspective, I want you to think about ECAs in 3 buckets. We talked about these earlier. Bucket number 1, in-school ECAs. Bucket number 2, summer ECAs. And bucket number 3, ongoing ECAs. Let's go through each one. In-school ECAs, bucket number 1, are obviously activities that you can do while you're in school. Student government, yearbook committee, sports teams, clubs and organizations like robotics and Spanish club, investment club, key club, 4-H, recycling club, and the list goes on. The key to understanding in-school clubs is that you can only do so many of them. and for only so many hours in a given day. Unfortunately, traditional school eats up 7, 8 hours of the day, and there are only so many things you can do after school. There are restrictions, school restrictions, district restrictions, time restrictions, legal restrictions, resource restrictions, political restrictions, manpower limitations. I'm not suggesting that in-school activities are good or bad. Just understand that you can only accomplish so much when operating under the auspices of a school or a club or an organization or a district, and when you're beholden to oftentimes other students or other teacher participants. So think about that before you jump into 6 different school clubs, which on balance may not allow you to accomplish all that much. Choose your in-school activities wisely. Okay, the next bucket is summer activities. This is where most motivated students make their money, both figuratively and sometimes literally. Why? Because you don't have many of the restrictions we just talked about in the in-school activities. You're on your own. You can explore internships, shadow sessions. You can start a small business. You can get a full-time job, a part-time job. You can travel. You can do art. You can build a drone. You can get yourself into peak physical condition for your sport. You can try sneaker flipping. You can spend 2 weeks learning about cryptocurrency. You can create an iPhone app. You can sponsor a 48-hour hackathon with a few friends. You can set a world record for number of continuous hours of rowing on an erg machine, which one of my sons did this summer. My point is that the possibilities are endless because you have time and you have the freedom. And you get to choose what you work on. You don't have to join a pre-existing club or organization at your school. You're in charge. And this is why summers are so valuable. Unfortunately, some students, maybe without realizing it, spend the summer hanging out with friends, going to the beach, and scrolling and swiping on their phones. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But after a week of this, enough should be enough, and you should be clamoring for something more. And if you have a scintilla of ambition, you will use the summer to try something different, something special, and something aligned with what you think you want to do with your life, your career, or at a minimum, your expected major. Activities that you do over the summer can really stand out because they can be so rich and unique and diverse and handpicked by you. And the third bucket, the last bucket, is the ongoing bucket. This is the least well-known and, in my experience, the least implemented bucket. This bucket represents activities that you can do in the background during both the school year and the summer. Things that don't require other students to help you. Things that don't require a teacher to be a sponsor. Things that don't require a lot of money or parents with connections. These are under-the-radar activities that, if done in sustained bursts, can really add up to something special over time. What are some examples? Well, what if you committed to reading 20 pages a day of a history book every day? That might take 30 minutes, right? Well, that small, relatively small time commitment might translate into you reading 100 history books by the time you're a junior in high school. That would be one of my top ECAs on my college application. I would simply write self-study, history. And then I would describe how by reading 20 pages a day that I knocked out 100 books on my favorite subject, which is history. If I'm an admissions officer, that would really get my attention. That's very unique. What if you committed to spending 20 minutes a day on Khan Academy, such that over the course of 2 to 3 years, you finished, a few hundred Khan Academy modules and accumulated a few million mastery points on topics ranging from statistics to economics to civics to personal development. How do you think that would look to an admissions officer? What if you committed 20 minutes a day to studying the stock market and making investment decisions on a ghost $100,000 mock stock portfolio? Do you think you will have learned something about investing over the course of 2 to 3 years? You'd actually have a 2 to 3 year performance record that you could talk about in an essay or an interview, whether it's good or bad. Was it easy to invest? Was it hard? Did you learn something? In this case, with a ghost portfolio, you're not even playing with your own money, but you certainly will learn similar lessons. What if you devoted 15 to 20 minutes a day taking online courses on Coursera or Udemy, and you started to learn about accounting or how to read financial statements or the principles of a capitalization table or how to raise venture funding? Do you think that might pay off when you're asked to write an essay about why you want to be a business major on your college application? Most students have no idea why they want to be a business major. And they have a superficial, at best, understanding about what business really means because they've been scrolling and swiping for 3 years. What if you devoted 15 or 20 minutes a day listening to podcasts in your area of interest? Maybe you're interested in gene therapy or archaeology or microcomputing or criminal justice or aerospace engineering. If you listen to 15 minutes of a podcast on these topics for 2 years, do you think you'd have something to say during a college interview about that topic? Do you think you'd have an interesting entry on your ECA list? The same goes for TED Talks. There are thousands of 15-minute TED Talks on nearly every topic out there. Why wouldn't you sacrifice 15 minutes of scrolling and swiping on your phone for 15 minutes of watching world-class experts talk about a topic that you think or might claim that you're interested in? What if you listen to 600 TED Talks over the course of 2 to 3 years in high school? You think that might get an admissions officer's attention? I guarantee, if I was an admissions officer, that would be the first question I asked you in an interview. What possessed you to watch 600 TED Talks, and which was your favorite? This is college admissions gold. The strategy has so much more relevance these days because students are spending so much time scrolling and swiping on their phones. It's simply impossible to ignore what would happen if you shifted 15 minutes on your phone to 15 minutes doing something productive. It's a complete no-brainer, and there's no excuse. You can't claim that you don't have the time. You can't get to the library. You don't have access to world-class experts. Or you don't have the money. You don't need any of those things. You have everything at your fingertips for free at all times. So knowing what you know now, if you choose to scroll and swipe for several hours a day for 2 to 3 years and continue to watch endless sports highlights and cat videos and garbage music videos and other nonsense, then it's on you. Just don't, as a rising senior filling out your college applications, scratch your head and wonder why you're not competitive, or complain about the system, or wonder why you don't have very much to say about a business major, or computer science, or politics, or biology. In today's world, you can become a subject matter expert in nearly any topic with 15 to 20 minutes a day of study over a few short years. This is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing for the students who take advantage of it and put their phone down for 15 or 20 minutes a day and do something productive. It's a curse for those who don't take advantage of this access because they want to scroll and swipe and play GTA and 2K and FIFA for hours a day. Now, I know most teenagers would never on their own think of these types of long-term self-directed projects without some prompting if they aren't prep-wellers or if they don't listen to a podcast like this. I get it. And even fewer still would even try such a thing even when they're introduced to it. It's just human nature. Trying to convince a teenager to do anything for 15 or 20 minutes a day consistently can be a challenge, especially if it's not sheer consumption and entertainment. But there are some students out there who are so frustrated about the college admission system and how little room there is to differentiate themselves, especially if they're not part of one of the favored groups right now in admissions, and they're so worried about the cost of college and whether or not that cost will actually be worth it, that they're willing to change things up and take action. They're willing to go that extra mile. And coming up with an quote-unquote ongoing activity like the ones we just talked about, or others, is worth it for them. It's a huge differentiator. You'd be amazed at what can be accomplished with 15 to 20 minutes of focused effort every day in the right direction. And it's a way to supplement your extracurricular activity list with something that doesn't necessarily require outside help and money and carpools and school endorsements or willing participants for that matter. Now, I spent a little more time on this last bucket than I planned for, but I think for good reason. The other two buckets are relatively common and mainstream, and you have to manage those well. But this third bucket, the ongoing bucket, is where you find the gold. If you're interested in chatting with me about how to manage these three buckets, or how to come up with some ideas for each one, or how to prioritize different ECAs, reach out to me. We'll set up a consulting call. We'll do an ECA audit and see how your current list of activities is working out and how to improve your list going forward. If you're not yet an online prep-weller, please enroll. You will receive short coaching videos explaining all of this stuff every week, ideally starting in 9th grade. It's really difficult to capture everything that goes into the college admissions process in one sitting, in one parent meeting at school, in a few random Facebook posts, or in a few disjointed conversations with friends at a soccer game. The information needs to drop at the right time, with the right tone, in the right dosing, and for the right student. That's all I've got for you today, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the continued support. If you know a parent with a 6th, 7th, 8th grader, 9th grader, 10th grader, 11th grader, 12th grader in high school that might find this helpful, please share this episode with them. You can do that by finding the small box with the tiny arrow pointing up. That's the share button. Click that button. Text your friends the link to this episode with a little personal note from you, recommending that they give it a listen. Of course, if you have questions, comments, or an idea for an upcoming episode, please don't hesitate to reach out to me by email, DM me on Instagram, check out our blog, our Facebook page, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. Until next week, goodbye, good luck, and never stop preparing. This podcast is brought to you by Prepwell Academy. Prepwell Academy is my one-of-a-kind online mentoring program that delivers to your 9th or 10th grader a short, highly relevant video from me every week, every Sunday in fact, where I give them a heads up about what they should be thinking about to stay ahead of the game. To get these valuable lessons into your child's hands, please head over to prepwellacademy.com and enroll your child today.